the film its own very specific quality. Well, it's finished. The other thing is that they never got the clear the rights for the music, and the music is extensive. So to do a finished version of this, they'd either have to solve that, or maybe they could decide that after all this time that is no longer necessary, or it might have to be rescored. Anyway, there is work to be done to have this film finally released, but it's still very much possible, and I hope it will happen sometime soon.
Thank you so much. Yeah, for me, I think this part of history is also really a fascinating part of the film itself, and sort of it becomes, I think in performance studies, we talked a lot about kind of performance, kind of whether it's defined by disappearance, and the film is, in this case, it almost becomes a film that disappeared in a way, and I found this aspect also kind of a really fascinating aspect of the film. And I think another aspect that really stood out to me is the way Abdoh weaves together so many different influences that oftentimes as researchers and curators we come together and put together different perspective and kind of able to understand the different aspects of the work. I'm more familiar with the history of queer art in LA and was drawn to the influences of like queer punk and body art, which is more well known. I was wondering if Patty, you could share your experience watching the film as an LA native and as also a theater scholar.
Yeah, so the first time I ever saw this film, I thought there was something really familiar about that, and that's kind of impossible, actually. I was like, what is this film reminding me of? And although, you know, I can watch it and be like, oh my god, there's Ron Athey with a cameo, like, under the bridge, right? I was like, what does this remind me of? And I think there's I mean, we all have theories, but I was like, you know, Reza's read John Rechy. That's what's going on in this film. And so, you know, to sort of maybe get to a different question you have. What's weird about the film is I was like, oh, what? And I kept thinking about like the milk on the stove and like the way he burns his hand. And there's a novel by John Rechy, which is not one a lot of people have read. Most people have read City of Night, which is his first very pre-Stonewall queer hustling novel. But he wrote a novel very close to when this film was made called The Miraculous Day of Amalia Gomez, which many fewer people have read. But there's this really intense scene where the Mexican mother realizes that her son is gay, and she burns his hand on the stove. And it's not exact, but I feel like he's playing with that sort of, I think he's just playing with John Rechy. So I think he's playing with an LA hustler history. And what's so strange when you watch it, I mean, I'd be curious actually to the audience in terms of like, what time period is this film in? Because sometimes it feels like it's contemporary to when it's made. And, you know, and sometimes I'm like, why at the end when Janie puts on the dress and she's gonna go to Hawaii with that suitcase, I'm like, but that's totally vintage, like that's some other time period. So when I watch the film, I don't know when it is. I don't know if it's the 50s or the 70s or the 90s, and there's something I think very conscious about that, where he's playing with this sort of earlier, I think he's playing with pre-AIDS, and then obviously everybody is sick in this film, right? Like AIDS is never mentioned, but everybody's sick. So there's something really queer going on with the time that, you know, I don't think I can be definitive about. That's not exactly what you asked me, but that's what I'm saying.
Totally. Yeah, that's also another really fascinating aspect. I think that also runs to Abdoh's theater and film practice, which is the engagement with queer temporality, and I think perhaps more pronounced in the adaptation of Mother Karamazov and Father Was a Peculiar Man. But in this film, definitely also the different temporality also is weaved together. And yeah, on a related note, I was wondering if you could also tell us more about the Latinx culture, tradition, and works of theater and performance, and also community member that had an influence or gave inspiration to Abdoh.
Yeah, so again, I think people when they've seen this film, and because I was trying to figure out where that bar was where Olga was singing, which you weren't there when they filmed that, right? So I don't know where that is. I mean, maybe someone knows. But a couple of years before this, Abdoh staged a drag travesti telenovela called Pasos de Obscuridad, with the Spanish wrong. The B shouldn't be there. Anyway, and Olga, that scene where there's with the Cuantos Dias Más, where she's singing, is actually a performer from La Plaza, which was a really famous gay Latinx bar in LA. So I think there are ways in which queer Latinx culture from outside the film comes into the film in really, really interesting ways. But also there's just a lot of Catholic imagery that I think is kind of interesting. So just to be short about it, I was just really obsessed with that great scene where she's feeding the whole neighborhood, right? And you're like, that's not possible. I mean, she's sick. You've seen her refrigerator. There's there's fruit, and there's bologna, and there's this half carcass of chicken. Clearly they don't really have food. And then suddenly you have this amazing scene where the entire neighborhood is being fed, and that to me is a sort of break with reality. But it's also, I was like, oh, she's gonna die. It's the Last Supper, right? So I was like, okay. But yeah, that's sort of what I was thinking about. And Trent, who's actually here, literally his name means train. It's literally a train. He sings a song about a train, and so I read all these essays, and no one ever translates the Spanish, or I was like, no one ever talks about the fact that he's a train. Very weird.
Yeah, it was really interesting to me too as well that the film is it's pretty bilingual, but it also left out subtitle and sort of left the space for opacity. And I recognized Sandy Crisp, but I actually didn't know the drag performer was Olga, who's a pretty well-known underground performer in LA as well.
John Fleck is in it also, as one of the NEA4, the one who has the seizure when he's holding the gun, and so there's an amazing collection of LA performers.
Yeah, and Patty just meet Tom. Tom is also here, who plays that trend.
Yes.
We are very honored. Very honored.
Any insights you want to give us, Tom?
Aside from it being like a portal to a quiet day, is really where I sit with. And how, as you were talking about it, Tony, the wide sort of chaotic violence during the performances and this kind of quietness, when I watch it now, like my relationship to Reza's work, I feel closer when I watch this now than when I watch archival footage of the plays. So I guess that's
Thank you so much. And yeah, we're very honored to have you here. And I have one last question, and then we can open up. In the chapter on the film from your upcoming book, upcoming monograph about Reza Abdoh, you propose to approach the film through the lens of brownness, drawn from Jose Esteban Munoz's work. And you highlight the aspects of the film that resist a sort of conventional or liberal framework of identity. Could you tell us a bit about the concept of brownness and how it kind of shed light on the aspects of Abdoh's kind of cross-cultural approach?
Yeah, I mean, I'll be brief because I want to get to the audience, but I think there's a brownness accorded to all the characters in the play, whether they're Latinx or not. There's something really diffuse about that, and by brownness I mean actually kind of exactly what you were saying, Tom. This sort of everybody's in precarity, everybody is hustling. Even the people who aren't sexually hustling are hustling. So to me, there's this diffusion of that precarity over a lot of characters, whether or not they're Latinx. But in terms of the liberal argument, which I won't go into, but there's like what we would expect in a film like this would be depth, something confessional, someone like exposing their interior life, and we never have that, which is what I think is amazing. So when I watch it, something which, you know, and some of that is hustler culture, like the hustler never divulges their self, right? But part of it that I think is really interesting is like exactly one person cries in this film. That's you when you're hearing the story on death row of the woman who goes to death row. That's a real story. And we only see someone smile once, and that's when Trin and Ricky are in the car driving. So we see people smile once, and we see someone cry once. So there's something really opaque about what people want, which I think is really interesting. But if you watch it over and over again, and I've been watching it over and over again on my laptop, you notice that someone cries once and someone smiles once.
I just want to point out that that teardrop is glycerin. It's real.
You didn't really cry, Tony?
No, I think the smile is quite genuine, don't you think, Tom?
Yeah, now we can open up the floor if anyone has any questions. One mic.
Hi. What a pleasure to be in a room with all of you, with people who knew Reza, who have discovered him perhaps more recently and love him and are researching his work, and all of you who, let's see, and it's, as an Iranian also, it's fascinating to see this diversity of people so engaged with his work, and of course who worked with him, and of course it's not reducible to his nationality, but I can't help but be curious about that as someone who watches a lot of theater and until not too long ago in Iran, so I'm just wondering, I'm trying to imagine actually friends in Tehran, how fascinated they would be to sit here amongst all of you discussing his work. Questions? Well, I mean, for perhaps even the two of you in the room who worked with him, I can't help but want to know, I don't know, another glimpse, if you could share, of just how that was. I mean, the glimpses you gave were very evocative and compelling of just running around in the hills and who he was as a person. And what about his work moves you? And perhaps for the other two of you, if possible, just, it's a very simple question, and you touched it, but what moves you so much about his work, and perhaps specifically this film? And I'll just say that for me, I did feel this quiet desperation. What you said was moving to me, a lovely hollowed out, I think you said, or feeling. And I was also, so it felt, gave me, or maybe it's how I'm feeling today or these days, a bit of anxiety, but also I was surprised by certain qualities of kindness and care that I wasn't expecting.
Well, one thing about Reza is that he was tremendously passionate, almost obsessive, and demanded so much of his collaborators, and sometimes that passion would drive him to be almost a manic extent. And he was sometimes difficult to work with for that case, but at the same time, he had tremendous reserves of kindness and love and friendship. So he demanded a great amount, but he also gave a lot of love. So, which was really necessary, at this certain point. That's kind of how he was able to inspire us to give so much to him, because it was, it really was a two-way street. And he was also, could be very funny. He could also be completely fucking unreasonable. It was a combination of all those things. So there's many things that move me about Reza's work. What was important for me as a collaborator is that he inspired me to do so many things that I did not ever imagine possible for me to do. He got me to express and to achieve certain things in my performances that were astonishing to me. So, and he had a gift for that. He had a gift for finding people and lifting them to an extraordinary level. And so it wasn't only my work that I had that experience, but I was surrounded by people who were having a similar experience. And sometimes it was a difficult one. But so there, I mean, there's so much his work. He feels like a theatrical version of Picasso. There's this movie called The Mystery of Picasso, where Picasso is painting a painting, then paints another painting over it, paints another painting over it. You realize that all his paintings are like 7 or 8 paintings on top of each other. That's very much the way Reza was. So there's there's millions of details that are moving to me. But my personal relationship with him was about somebody who discovered and made me believe in myself.
If you would like to add something.
I think from a performance standpoint, I didn't know, and I guess we never knew exactly what was going to happen ultimately. So there's, as Tony was saying, there's layer upon layer upon layer. So you're sometimes, certainly in the live performance, a little bit in the dark about what other people are doing. And yet there's this, his unity of vision and his unity of just command, I think, is what really gave the work a kind of tautness to it. It had a taut quality, not like teaching, but it was tight, and you would look at it and you might not realize it, and a lot of it would be like, they'd say like, well, that's just improv, you guys are like just fucking around, and it wasn't, and that's how his ability to express that through, not just through the performers, but also just through the design, through the soundscape, just the command of it. So.
What's moving about it? I mean, it's interesting. I mean, I find all of it moving. The film is moving in a slightly different way. I mean, I'm a bicultural working class kid from LA, so that's sort of, I wouldn't call it a nostalgia, but that sort of, the embeddedness of working class white Mexican life in LA is very much what I grew up with, I guess. But yeah, there's something really quiet about it in a really interesting way. It's really curious to me because I talked to Salar about this film, and I talked about those scenes that seem like they're improbable. Especially that one where you turn the corner, and I heard everybody laugh, where you're like, where they turn and there's like the mariachis, right? You're like, why are there mariachis suddenly in the scene? And I was just like, well, people find that very absurd, and I was like, well, I guess I don't find it absurd, and I guess those are the things that I find really funny, or when they're like, when Trent is like laughing at the comic books as the mother's dying, and I'm like, well, that's so totally Mexican, like someone is laughing at death. And so when I talked to Salar about it, he's like, oh right, and I was like, I do think there are things about Iranian or Persian death culture and Mexican death culture that are greatly resonant, and so I can't watch this film like an Iranian, but I can. The moment when the mother dies, I feel is like this moment where he displaces something onto Mexican Catholicism. So I find it really moving. But I think I watch Reza's work like a Mexican watches it, and that's slightly different than some other people watch it, maybe. You should answer that question. Why do you find it interesting?
Thank you all so much. Yeah, I'm learning so much as well from historical and also personal relationship and understanding of the film. And for me, personally, I came across just, I've been sort of mostly kind of working with queer archival methodology and working on kind of across different cultures and communities. And I think queer art has been a way for me to also relate to and learn about culture across kind of languages and geographies, and in the research of the film, actually, the novel actually is I only had a brief kind of research, but actually found it to be a pretty kind of fascinating story of the writer and novel itself. Even though I think some maybe Mrs. might disagree, but
Sala has very strong opinions.
but yeah, I think that was kind of generally how I approached the film, and I also worked on a few years ago worked on the exhibition on queer Chicano art, but it was on from the 60s and 90s, so there were quite a few overlaps with I think Reza's circles and collaborators. Yeah.
I actually will use this occasion. I have a question. I'm very curious if you know if Reza has ever discussed that, or you heard about his interest in history of film, because while watching the film, it's definitely interestingly has its own form that doesn't match with a conventional form. The editing is very abrupt. The actors are kind of sort of dehumanized in a kind of Bressonian way. They're acting something that's almost robotic. There's all these repetitions, and I'm curious, has he ever talked about some filmmakers or films that he found inspiring, etc.?
Reza was an obsessive consumer of all forms of cinema. So we would see Terence Davies movies together. I sat with him one night during a James Bond marathon. We saw 3 James Bond movies together, laughing the entire time. I once walked in and he was watching The Shawshank Redemption. And I kind of made a quip, this fucking movie. He was like, it is a masterpiece. It is about love between men. I was like, oh, he's got a point. So obviously, Person was part of his landscape. Reza would take from everybody, but he wouldn't, he wasn't necessarily going to give away his influences. He absorbed everything, but he also then wanted to claim it for himself. Reza never talked about Jerzy Grotowski's theater, but one time I found myself in Poland and I saw some footage of early work like The Constant Prince. And like Reza's work, it was one incredibly fast tableau after another. And it's wow, there's obviously an influence there, but Reza wasn't going to say it. Because he was an extraordinary thief. But, like they say, poor artists, bad artists borrow, great artists steal. Reza was a great artist. And he was also this was during the time when sampling was huge, hip hop was everywhere. And I think Reza he stole a sampler, like a rapper taking samples and turning them into loops. So yeah, every film influence you think you see in Reza's there, it is there.
Thank you.
Oh yeah. Hi there. This might be giving away that I'm slightly hungry, but I was very moved by all the images of food throughout the movie. And like the sex, which a lot of people wanted but very little was had, there was a lot of food that wasn't really eaten until that sort of final supper scene. But yeah, the pizza, the corn, the rice. So I guess I was sort of interested about all of that imagery.
You don't want to talk about the food?
No.
Yeah, I mean, there is something kind of deferred about eating in this, and that's why that super banquet kind of scene is so stunning. But the spilling of the rice, I mean, and also the plates. I was like, oh yeah, that comes back in a lot of plays. The broken plates, they come back, right? And all of the white food, literally white food, not white people food, but white food, but also white food. But I think that's all the precarity. It's sort of the transaction, right? So I think what's so touching about that, right, is that they go and turn these tricks, but they're like, I got to get a meal out of it, right? Like, you're not hungry. He goes to, he eats like 2 hamburgers while, Tom is jacking off in the bathroom, right? But yeah, there's something about not having that I think is super important. And all that you were saying, the money thing, right? Like the way that he was very precise. Isn't that one of the things that Reza was really precise about, is the way that everything is transactional, which I think goes back to this sort of hustling thing, right? Which is like, just because it's transactional doesn't mean it never has tenderness sometimes. Like, we think of those things as entirely separate, or we want to separate the transactional, but I think this film is like, no, that it sometimes is transactional.
And just like the way people express needs for each other, like, there's so much emotion in my character's connection with Peter's character, with Ricky, but at the end of the day, it's like, can you give me some Diet 7-Up? It's like, these are people without much language to communicate, and the plays are like a tornado of language, a tsunami of language. So that's one of the other things. I think it would be really fascinating to watch this film in concert with the theater piece that was going on at the same time, because a lot of these sort of distinctions, the fact that this is really kind of a minimalist echo to the maximalism of the plays could be really generative.
I had a comment, but she's got a question. But my comment was, I don't like to read folks' cultural background into works, but he's screaming it.
Yeah.
Like, the name is from Pavi Zadeh's book, and it's like, it's dystopian, Kafkaesque, all that shit that he's borrowing from, and like the food, the washing, it's like painfully Iranian to me. Mm-hmm. And so, do you ever co-write or co-author things, like whatever dramaturgy, you get someone who's from that culture to kind of riff? Have you ever done that with the kind of work?
Yeah, and so sometimes I co-watch things with people. So like, as you're saying, with the burial scene, I'm like, it is completely Iranian and it is completely Mexican at the same time. Do you see what I'm saying? So like the way that she's wrapped in the white, like, yes. So I do. I haven't done it with all of it, but yes. Yeah, and there are a lot of young Iranian folks who are, it's been very easy. They're like, I'll totally watch that with you. Let's watch that together. And it's often very layered, right? But he chose a way, like, it's like he chose to be Iranian through Mexican culture in this film in a way that I don't. This kind of, it's very brown. I don't know how to say it. It's brown. Yeah.
I also just want to say that there's a similar claim of the Persian diaspora to Los Angeles, which is also referred to as Tehrangeles. So, it's also the work of in a way, a Los Angeles native, because Reza ended up in Los Angeles quite young in his teenage years. So he really, it's really a native expression of the city. That's also from his Iranian background.
My question was just a kind of follow up and echo. I was just wondering if either of you remember him talking about Persian philosophy, or like even the Butakur, the blind owl. Do you remember during the filming of this the movie? Did he? So
he never talked about the novel when he was doing the film. Other people would say, oh, this is, but he never talked about it. He mostly talked about Persian culture through his family. His relationships with his family, with his mother and his father, really sort of framed things. And would occasionally tell stories. He said, well, in Iran, there was a member of the family who was really, really old, and his wife took him to the cliffs in his wheelchair and pushed him over. And then occasionally he would talk about going to Persepolis for the arts program and the thing, and he talked about working with It was a Robert Wilson piece, which has since been sort of claimed to be a tall tale he told. He claims that he was in a performance of the famous arts festival that used to happen in southern Iran. And he claimed he was in the Ka Mountain piece of Robert Wilson, that he walked around in a circle saying, "I want to buy some chocolate." And his mother claims, like, no, I never took him down there during that time, but who knows? So he would talk about it from an anecdotal way. He would tell stories. He would never like give a statement about his background, or he would never like talk about Iranian culture. He wouldn't do that even in the work, but as an act of friendship or communication, he would occasionally share anecdotes of his childhood, and he would say things like, "Yeah, my dad had a bowling alley. The Shah bowled there." His father ran a very famous football club and had a bowling alley that was the hot place to be. These were like fascinating glimpses of the pre-revolutionary Iran that he occasionally shared with us.
Thank you so much. That means a lot to me. As somebody, I always thought of him as an artist who didn't want to be known as an Iranian artist, and we have a handful of, very talented filmmaker. I feel like Kaveh Zahedi always talks about why he feels a certain way about his Iranian side. So I was really moved watching the film tonight, how Iranian it is, like Ilk. That was really surprising to me. So anyways, I really appreciate it.
The only thing I'll add, as Tony's saying, I didn't, certainly during the plays, get much of an input of what a reference was or what he was basing something on, but his love of, we would gather sometimes. He had an apartment in Venice Beach, in Los Angeles, and he would cook, and you knew these recipes were from his mom and his family, and that to me was what brought me to his culture, through that sharing and that care he had for his actors.
Curious, like there's been a lot of talk about the difference in the differences between the forms with the live work and the film. Did Reza talk about why he chose to make a film and set out to make a film in the first place?
I mean, he was obsessed with films. I feel like if Reza had lived longer, he might have actually made a more strong transition into being a film director. It was obvious that growing up in Los Angeles, he saw this massive film machine around him, but it cost money. It was easier to get a bunch of people to meet him in a room and make something extraordinary. So his first successes were as a theater director, but I really felt he was hungry to do more film, and we shared a lot of his love for film. I don't know if you know the work of Terence Davies, the British director who did Distant Voices, Still Lives. That was an extraordinary experience seeing that movie with him, and he really recognized that movie. It's a very abstract, almost very little dialogue about a boy growing up in Yorkshire, and it's obviously very queer-coded, and in some ways has some resonances with this film. So yeah, Reza was obsessed with movies. So yeah, no, he would have made a lot more.
I think you have a question?
Something that really stood out to me while I was watching the movie, and kind of actually really only set it out towards the end, was that the main character, Ricky, or central character rather, Ricky, was totally devoid of any personal plot. And I feel like his entire existence in the movie was just made up of how he could serve the needs and desires of others, basically. And since Abdoh's work is so deeply personal, I'm curious if you have any insight about is there meaning behind that, as his writing or anything like that?
I'm wondering if I think it's devoid, actually. I mean, definitely he moves from transaction to transaction, right? We never know what he's thinking, right? We never know what Ricky's thinking. But there is a pairing at the end. Like, it is a queer love story on some level, right? It's Ricky and Trent's nascent love story that, you know, when you get to quotations, that's like the end point of that, right? But I don't know. I think I see a little bit more opening, but only at the end with the procession, right? So, you know, the mother dies, and that's the coming of age. That's Ricky becoming, he's 18, right? He becomes an adult.